Hi guys. So today's video is going to be a non-spoiler book review on the book The Poppy War by R.F. Kuang. I will be doing a very spoilery chat video for those of you who have read it and want to see completely spoiled book talk about it. But in this video, we're just going to be talking about generalization overview of the book without giving away anything. Getting right into it though, this book is an Asian-inspired fantasy series, and it follows a young girl named Rin who is a war orphan, and in her society, people have been forced to take in war orphans to prevent them from becoming thieves and things like that, basically prevent them from becoming a nuisance to society. The family that's taken Rin in are not good people. They are very emotionally abusive. They really have no regard to Rin's well-being and her happiness. They are also involved in opium trade, and with Rin, they don't feel that she's really worth much. She is dark-skinned, and in their society, the lighter your skin, kind of the more respectable you are. But they managed to make this deal where they're going to sell Rin off to this very rich man, and they're planning on having her marry this guy, and then basically her foster mother tells her, once you guys are married, get him addicted to opium. So, you know, not exactly the best of parents. So to try and escape this fate, Rin decides to study endlessly for this exam that will determine whether or not she has high enough scores to get into the most prestigious school. If she can get into the school, she won't have to pay tuition. It's purely based off of their test scores. And this particular school is called Guard, and it trains its students for war. That's kind of the general setup of the book. In saying that, I do now want to touch on some elements of the book itself, of the plot, of the writing, of the pacing. Generally speaking, I would say that when I'm doing book reviews, I try really hard to acknowledge the fact that even if a book is maybe not my personal taste, I'm still going to try to present it in a way that best reflects what the book entails. That way, for instance, if the book has extremely lyrical writing and maybe kind of a heavier romantic plot line, I'll tell that to you guys, and I'll let you know that that's an element of the book. And I'm not going to sit here and be like, this book sucked because the writing was too flowery. I'm not going to say that because that's a personal opinion, and I'm trying to review the book itself. So those of you who like those kinds of things, or for those who dislike those kinds of things, will have a better idea of it. Now, the reason I'm saying that is because there are a few things in this book that, for me, they came across as I don't know that they're necessarily preference thing, but I'm going to try and present them in a way that's a preference thing rather than just saying, oh, I thought this was a potential weakness. For example, at the very beginning of the book, when Rin is studying to get into Guard, she has to have a 2-year time span to study for this exam, and that 2-year time span goes by very quickly. For some readers, this is going to be a huge plus. They don't want to sit around and wait for the character to learn all this information if it can be summed up in a quick manner. I found myself personally having very conflicting feelings about the pacing at the beginning, because when we're first introduced to Rin, you feel for her immediately. I think the author did an amazing job of creating an investment in the character and really wanting her to succeed. And then I myself was pulled slightly out of the story when I felt like for a little while here, we're just kind of getting a montage of the following 2 years. If you're the kind of reader who prefers to get to know your character right away, to really feel like you have a good idea of their personality, then I think you'll like this beginning and the pacing of the beginning, because you definitely get an insight into Rin very quickly. If you're the kind of person though who likes to get to know your characters as the story progresses, maybe through internal dialogue or just through dialogue between characters, you might not love this element. Beyond just the pacing at the beginning of the book, I actually do want to talk about the pacing later in the book, because once again, it's something that for some people, not going to mind whatsoever, and other people, it might bother them a little. The book definitely has a turn about halfway through. It goes from feeling like a school setting, a sort of kind of a young adult tone, to having a very dark tone. Much of this book is inspired by real events. It's inspired by real war crimes and war violence and just the terrible atrocities that occur because of war. If you are somebody who does not want to read anything that is extremely violent and detailed about its violence, you probably don't want to pick up this book. The author is by no means glorifying this violence. They are just showing that this this is what happens when people go to war, when people think that another society is beneath them and that those people aren't even really people. These are the things that they're capable of doing, and those things are awful. I very much, it sounds very morbid to say, but I really appreciated that the author wasn't shy, and she wasn't shying away from the fact that these things happen. They have happened in our own world, and this book is very much supposed to be a reflection of our own world. So for me, as much as those things are awful and those things bother me, it didn't bother me that the author included those things in the book. How this all ties back into the pacing, though, has to deal with the fact that often when something is about to happen in this book, you get the information that you need to know before that scene occurs. There's not necessarily a whole lot of setup, and sometimes the setup kind of just feels like it's the bare minimum. At first, because the first half of the book and the second half of the book have such different tones, I was under the impression that it was a reflection of the fact that sometimes things just come at you and you're not prepared, and that's why it kind of feels like, as the reader, we're not prepared for this shift. And at first, I loved the shift. I loved the shift because I loved the way it completely altered Rin's perspective. At the beginning of the book, she's a bit naive and she's a bit closed-minded. She's very much concentrating on her own future, and she's also very caught up in the things that are involved in her life. And then when the shift happens in the book and the tone changes, she suddenly is very, very aware that the squabbles that she's had in her life thus far are so insignificant compared to how awful some of the things are that happen. However, I do feel like this impression was slightly diminished because there are some things that happen in the last 80 or so pages. They're not necessarily things that have to do with the awful atrocities. Not those. I'm not referencing those. But at some point in the book, it no longer feels like we are getting true character development. It feels like the characters are just acting in a way that serves the plot rather than what they would actually do given what we've been shown of their character. If you love books, though, with a war setting, if you love books with a school setting, if you love books with a strong-minded main character, I don't know that any of the things I've mentioned are going to bother you. I also think that if you are accustomed to reading young adult fantasy and you go into this, the way in which the characters speak and the way in which a lot of the information is presented is not overly fluffy or flowery. It's very, very direct. Overall, though, I think that this book has so many things that so many people are going to love. I think it's a very accessible book for a lot of people, given the way the writing style is so direct. If you're the kind of person, though, that wants everything to be very, very fleshed out, if you want to take a lot of time to get to know your characters and to get to know the plot, then you might not feel as connected to this book. I personally think that I would have really adored and loved this book if it were like 3 books long instead of just being 1 book, because I really want to know all these details, and so much of the details are not shown to us. We just kind of breeze through them, and for some people that's such a plus because they're so tired of all the details. If you've read this book, let me know what your thoughts were on it. Let me know if you loved it, if you weren't the biggest fan, and if you're interested in this book and the premise sounds good to you and you like a faster paced book without all the detail, I would definitely say to give it a go. If you want to talk spoilers, I will have a spoiler chat coming up for this book. But anyway, as always, happy reading. Thanks so much for watching, and I hope you have a great rest of your day. Bye, guys.